The Center for Procurement Excellence is a nonprofit member organization with a mission of educating, promoting, and advocating for better RFP processes. Join CPE today and make your RFPs faster and more transparent. Membership also includes discounts to all of our training and networking events. CPE hosts a variety of virtual and in-person networking and training events throughout the year. Visit our website to get signed up. CPE Speakers Bureau is available for your regional and national meetings and professional conferences. Contact us to learn more.
Welcome to Ask the RFP Doctor, CPE's monthly web series where we discuss the latest best practices in procurement and supply chain management.
Trying to find that tricky unmute button before I started, pretending I'm a mime. And But good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Victor Leamer. I am the senior buyer with Spokane County in Eastern Washington, where I am just celebrated my 6th anniversary. And before that, I worked 30 years with the state of Alaska doing procurement in Department of Administration and the Department of Fish and Game. I am a trainer through NIGP and found out that I love RFPs a long time ago, and I love training people on this topic matter, of which we'll be talking today in regards to a survey that I did earlier this year. I'll tell you more about that in just a little bit. We'll give you the highlights of the survey, some of the comments that were received, and then we'll have a discussion on how some of those comments have an impact on you and maybe how you would react in regards to those comments. So in July of this year, I issued a quick survey with very basic questions in regards to the topic of RFPs. What do you love the most? What do you hate the most? And what do you understand the least? Not knowing what to expect, I was very surprised and not surprised on the results. Not scientific, but the responses received showed a very good trend in regards to these 3 areas in our attitudes towards RFPs. Now, the easy stuff to talk about in regards to RFPs are the things that we love. And we basically love the best value process here, the flexibility of it, and then less so the evaluation process in regards to how we get to the conclusion of who we're going to be rating as the highest rated, and then also the drafting of it. But the price and best value, as you'll see in some of the comments, really reflect on our passion towards RFPs. Now, these are just some, you might notice some spelling errors, but I like to quote people exactly as they do it. So those spelling errors are continued in the comments, but some of the highlighted or in bold or just some statements that jumped out to me. In chat, you're welcome to put any comments that reflect, if the survey results jump out to you, something that you think you can resonate with, go ahead and put something in the chat. But the one comment at the very bottom, request for partnership. I really enjoyed that. That resonated with me, and my mission lately in regards to getting the best out of not only our end users who are helping to draft the statement of work, but also from our suppliers, getting the best from them, hence the partnership. And then the other items that were really noted as loved in the survey is the flexibility. This really resonated in the fact that an RFP is not the same thing every time. You can craft it to fit your needs however you want, and hopefully you're getting less and less out of the dusting off the old one, but using a template of which you have choices in regard to how you're going to proceed. But also, all these are in bold because they really resonated with me. And I really like the bottom one, not having a public opening when it comes to RFPs, unless you're in Florida. And Florida is a whole nother session sometime that we could talk about. Hate the most. There are a lot of things that really jumped out in regards to the survey. And I don't like the word hate. I would say things that we struggle with, that we wish weren't there, but because they're there, we have to deal with them. But the highest rated item that we dislike is the time that RFPs take. Personally, myself, I think this is a reflection on our end users and not necessarily on us, because most of us have legal requirements in regards to time limits, but it also covers working with the end users, drafting the scope of work, issuing it, having the evaluation, calling for interviews. That whole process is 6 weeks to 6 months. That part is time consuming. And the part that's not reflected in here is the element of time that we don't have control over. When our end users come to us and say, hey, I need this out on the street next week, rather than I need this out on the street next year, which I think we would love to hear more often. Something we don't like as much either is the evaluation team and bias that may show up, and how we have to deal with this. And for the Brian and Jake, for you, I'm hoping you're seeing some things that, like, oh, we could do a session on here, we could do a session on that. That's why I'm glad that you invited me to share the survey results, because most of these items that you're reading are areas that people need clarification or understanding on. So please borrow as you feel necessary for future ideas for some sessions. Another time element is the drafting, the criteria, and the statement of work. You see some of the problems that we work with. It's the end users and getting them not to talk necessarily in their jargon or their acronyms, but us having to be interpreters and able to write it in that anybody reading it would understand what our intent is, what our desires are. That takes a lot of work. The evaluation points, the criteria, again, working with the end users to get out of them, if you only had one criteria, what would it be? And then adding the other criteria instead of the standard 3 or 4 that you always use. And amazingly, 20% for each one, including price. Again, time is the enemy when it comes to working on your end users in regards to getting the criteria properly selected and the weight that is associated with it. And Jake, it's not stealing, it's borrowing, because in procurement, if you're stealing from me, you're stealing from somebody else. And we love sharing our information with each other too. And then some other miscellaneous topics that jumped out to me that I found amusing. One person said, what do you hate about RFPs? And almost everything. And there's some days that I think we have that element too. And suppliers not understanding the RFP process. One of the questions that we're not sharing from the survey here today that I'll share with the rest of the team for possible use later on is, if you could ask a supplier one question, what would it be? The number one question was, why don't you read our RFP? So that would be a very interesting session, and possibly get some suppliers to show up too. But when we come at this point, before we jump into our lack of understanding some of the areas RFP, I reflect back on these areas that I say we hate in the survey. And something that I learned when it came to virtual training when COVID hit, that if you had the attitude of what I do in class in person will never work in the virtual world, then your mind was made up and you weren't open to be creative in how to make it work. So those items that you reflect back on that were noted as items that we hate, I would say we probably need to adjust our attitudes. We may not like some of those elements, but if we work hard on understanding them and how to work not around them, but with them, including our end users, our suppliers, the better it will be. So in another class, I asked people how many people were terrified the first time you jumped off a high dive, and everybody raised their hands. And I asked then how many people died from jumping off a high dive for the first time. And nobody died, which tells me if you have a good attitude, you're going to have success. But if you're afraid of doing something and won't take a step, like being on a high dive and you walk back down, your mind will never allow you to be creative. Now, as we jump into the final question in regards to areas that we don't understand, keep that mindset open in regards to, I may not understand this, but unless I work better towards understanding it and getting training, I'm going to cut myself off from creativity, finding really the best supplier, getting what's best for our end user. So as we look at these real quick, things that we don't understand, let's look for opportunities to try to understand them. Now, in our breakout session, we're going to talk about these areas that we either hate or understand the least. And the question will be, what are some of those areas and what might others suggest that you do about that? We'll jump into some of the comments real briefly here in regards to those areas we don't understand. And drafting and the scope of work was clearly the highest rated misunderstood concept about the RFPs. And there's been Ask the RFP Doctor sessions that touch on this that I encourage you to go back and review, and some other training sessions we'll talk about in just a little bit. If you do not understand the why behind those areas that you don't understand, it's almost impossible to know how. When I'm training on RFPs, we work strictly on the why before we get to the how, because you need to know why you're doing it before you do it, which is kind of unique to our work. And here's a quote that jumped out to me: how to better put together convert solicitations that used to be bids and make them RFPs. It's frustrating to put out an RFP and the respondents treat it like a bid. They don't put hardly any information about their company back into a response. It's like a square peg, round hole. To me, this goes back to the time needed to prepare and also to train your project manager and your end users into providing enough information. And we can talk about that at another session. Evaluations, the evaluation team was the next highest rated misunderstood. Again, this goes back to the time to train your end users at the very beginning as you're drafting your RFP. This is what's going to be expected of you. This is the time commitment. And then I thank them at the beginning, during the evaluation process, and at the end, something that we never hear in the procurement world, but something that we should do, since it's going to be not only their knowledge, but their time that we're going to be getting from them. But that time you put in training them on the evaluation process will have a direct impact. But if you don't understand the evaluation process, you need to do that before you train others. Post-solicitation steps are very confusing. Protest debriefs, those areas that I use the term, keep the end in mind, that you need to understand how items discussed at the beginning as you're drafting will have an impact 6 weeks to 6 months later on. And if you don't understand having language in the RFP and why it's there for these particular areas, it's very important that you do understand. And finally, a couple other miscellaneous items that I threw in from the survey that I thought were very good. Now, what showed me throughout this entire survey was that RFPs are a mystery. They are very powerful, but in the wrong hands, it could be a problem. But in the right hands, I think that you can move from being known as the no department to being the no department. We're often seen as a roadblock, but the more that you move from hating those elements of the RFP or not understanding into those elements that you do need work on, the more of an asset you are to your department and your entire entity. Now, the Ask the RFP Doctor is a great source, and that's why I'm here most every third Thursday of the month or watching the videos in return. But I'm also a part of the RFP Dream Team, and we're kicking off an RFP Learning Lab series at the end of February. It's 6 weeks in a row, every Thursday from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Pacific time. and you can go to NIGP, find out if any of those labs would be pertinent to you, or if the entire series would help you out. Registration's open more, and you can go to NIGP for those details. Now we're getting ready. Since I'm at the 15-minute mark, almost perfectly, we're going to talk about some areas that we're going to move into. But before we do that, I just want to emphasize that your opinion or your attitude of the process, not your opinion, but your attitude of the process really makes a difference. We don't have control over the RFP process in the sense that we have to follow regulations, we have to follow statutes, we have to follow the process. We are protectors of the process. So whether you hate it or not is not important. I have a slide that comes on, and I'll ask the audience, well, what do you think about this? And as someone's answering, another slide comes up and the rock says, it doesn't matter what you think, it's what you do. You can always make decisions about improving the process by getting more training and understanding why, and then training others in regards to that process. And finally, back to that training, better yourself. Attend these sessions every month. Learn, apply, understand the why before you teach others. And that's your end users to your suppliers.
This has been Ask the RFP Doctor, brought to you by the Center for Procurement Excellence.